Gathered around. My family tries to have dinner together every night. It's a time where we can share our day. In fact, we do something we call roses and thorns. So your rose is your very best part of your day, we share that. And your thorn is your worst part of your day, we share that, to kind of bond. Being that I have so many children, very early on we had to make a rule that the thorn of your family could never be your sibling. Apparently that was a really big one. So we tried to avoid that, but just kind of bond over the dinner table. And so Jesus is at this dinner, and he's talking about how you can really bond at these meal times. He's been a guest on the Sabbath to some religious leaders, and there's some questions there as to whether they've invited him to be part of it or whether they've invited him to keep an eye on him, which is really kind of what they were doing. But here Jesus is at this meal. Now, these meals don't look like the picture of the Last Supper that you see where they're all in one long line at the table. This isn't what it looks like. Think of a table that's like the shape of a letter C and low to the ground with like couches that you recline on. This is what the table would be like. And everyone would be seated at the same table. And at the head of this letter C would be the host of the party. And then in order of priority, preference, favoritism, you went around the table until you got to the very end, facing the host of the table. And the one in the very end was the servant of others, would get up and serve others at the table. So when he says, don't pick your spot based on where you think you should be, you might get moved down. This is the structure they're looking at. This was hard for me to understand until I realized when I went to Israel and saw these structures of these tables, because I thought of like a wedding party. Well, there's the head table, and you sit there or you don't, and then there's everybody else. But this is not the structure that they had. You really did get asked to move down if you didn't belong that high up. There really was a hierarchical structure. So this is how they set people down. And Jesus notices guests placing themselves closer and closer to the host to show how important they are. And he said, don't do that. You're going to get yourself moved down, and it's not going to go well for you. Which is inevitably true, because if you get moved down publicly, it was an honor and shame society. You would be publicly shamed to be moved down. In that society, if you were moved down and publicly shamed, you might not be able to do business or have trade or find a good marriage partner in your family. And so it's better to be honored and brought up. And so Jesus is warning them, don't think too highly of yourselves. You're going to get put in your place publicly. It's a good warning. It's a good thing to consider, but this is how the structure fit. And he warns the host, not just to invite people that can pay you back, not just to invite people that you're showing off by having a party with. Invite people that can't pay you back. Because everyone is equally loved in the eyes of God. Everyone is valued in the eyes of God. Not just people that can do favors for you or have political clout or have financial means. Everyone is loved in the eyes of God. And so because of this, everyone should be invited. Not just people that can do you favors. Now, sometimes when you look at Scripture, it's kind of old or abstract or hard to connect with. So let me give you another story, maybe one that looks a little more familiar, certainly one a little more recent, one from my family. So in the 1940s, there was a young man, son of a logger from Pellston, up near Pleasant View. There was a young woman over from Melanson, daughter of a farmer, did a little bit better than the logger, but not much. And they fell in love at a dance at the hall in Pellston one Saturday night. Well, pretty soon, this man, my grandfather, got drafted for World War II. Got sent down to boot camp and came back, in fact, made a phone call down to the Burt Lake post office girl he was seeing. I'm coming back on furlough. Meet me in Detroit and marry me. So they showed up some afternoon in Detroit at the Methodist church with just the two of them and a couple of family members as witnesses, and got married, stayed married for well over 50 years. Now, in that time, they settled into the Metro Detroit area, and my grandmother started working for General Motors in the factory. Well, with the economic boom of the post-World War II time and the houses and the factory work, things were a little bit easier than it had been in their childhood. And Grandma and Grandpa made a lot of friends in the factory, and Grandma got invited to everybody's wedding because they all had been raised the same way. They had all had these pillar-to-post, penny-pinching weddings with no one at them, and so now that they were factory workers, their daughters were going to have some weddings. So they did. They did. They had all of these weddings for all of this next generation through General Motors, and so in came all of these brides, and they invited the whole General Motors factory. Pretty much. So it was my grandmother's turn. Her only daughter was going to get married in June of 1967. My mother. And my mother said, "Can we have a nice small family wedding?" That wasn't happening because my grandma owed some favors. Everybody from General Motors that had invited her to their daughter's wedding now needed to come to her daughter's wedding. My mother tells the story of graciously shaking hands and introducing herself for the very first time to most of the 300 guests that she had at her Metro Detroit wedding. Do we still return favor for favor? We do. Their daughter had to invite all of their friends because they were invited to their friends' weddings. We still live in this culture. It may not be as easy to see as it is when we have a C-shaped table that we're moving people up and down, but certainly we still live returning favor for favor, and Jesus says this is not the way to live. We don't live in a way that we pay one another back and we invite people because they can do something for us. We do for people because they have value, because they have equal value in the eyes of God. So Jesus was trying to explain that we don't need to live by the social systems where the haves keep having and the have-nots have less. Recently, in July, I went to a conference in Kansas City, and this conference was based on youth in the United Methodist Church. And I heard a lot of people speak about a lot of great things going on and a lot of struggles that the youth were having. And one of the last speakers I heard spoke about two 12-year-olds at a church in the Queens area of New York. And these children created something called the Peanut Butter and Jelly Project. See, they were very concerned about the hunger that was surrounding their church, and that the food pantry had less than it should to meet the needs of those that were hungry. So they created the Peanut Butter and Jelly Project, which happened once a month on a Sunday, that they made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, tons of them in brown bags. And let me tell you how I thought the story was going to end. I thought the story was going to end with, so they went out and took it to the food pantry and made sure that these people that were hungry had peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. This is what I thought. But it's not how the story ended. So they went to the back of the church and stood there with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in bags, and they said, whatever you were going to go spend out on lunch this week, don't worry, we made your lunch. Donate it for the food pantry. You know what I loved about that? They understood that there isn't a hierarchy. It isn't those that are hungry should eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. It's we should eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to care for those that are hungry. They were in it together. There was equal value. And these 12-year-olds that made this mission effectively churches where their food pantry, their local food pantry, no longer hurt for money and their shelves were no longer bare because these kids decided to stand in the back of the church once a month and say, will you eat peanut butter and jelly so that the hungry don't go hungry anymore? Fabulous. Talk about living out faith. Talk about living that moment where you know that the person next to you has just as much value as you do. Not to be pushed further down the table, not to put yourself higher, but that each of you are equal in the eyes of God. This is humility. Christian humility. The humility that lets us know that humility is not a low self-esteem issue. Humility is a true self-esteem issue of knowing you have full value in God's eyes, and so does the person next to you. This is what Jesus preaches about. This is what he tells us. And so Jesus is calling for a change in community behavior. Some people refer to this as kingdom behavior, but a kingdom inevitably has a hierarchy. This is community behavior, one that says that we all sit at the table together. This is Christian behavior. Humility is what marks the followers of Jesus. We sincerely live out the work of the Lord when we realize that everyone is valuable to God. And therefore, as Christians, we are called not to show partiality, not to believe that something is good enough for us, but that someone else doesn't deserve it. Church, this is a lesson that I think we struggle with in our everyday. As much as scriptures were 2,000 years ago, they are so very today as well. Today as well, we see cultural questions in our country asking inevitably, do you have as much worth as I do? And when that question is answered no, we have a whole lot of social problems. But Jesus says to answer that question with yes. You have as much value as I do. Now present from there. What difference does it make if we look at the hungry people of this world as us, or the hurting children of this world as ours? What difference does it make if we don't move ourselves up one seat compared to someone else? Church, may you go forth in Christian humility, knowing your